Welcome to European Journeys. This is the 8th stage of a series in which we explore the Reformation in Sweden. We have seen through the past stages how the Reformation has brought much good to the country of Sweden. And yet, not everything that happened during those times and in the name of the Reformation was necessarily in line with the principles of the Reformation. Now, what were those principles? We can summarize them in one sentence, and that sentence would be that scriptures, that is the revealed word of God, should rule all of life. That was the basic principle of the Reformation. Well, today we are going to look at an event that in fact was not really in line with that principle. And to do so, we are going to visit the county known as Södermanland. As you look at the map, you see there, it's located south of one of the major lakes of Sweden, Lake Mälaren. And as we zoom in, you see there a small town named Mariefred on the eastern part of the county. Mariefred simply means the peace of Mary, so you can see there a connection with the Roman Catholic past of the land. It is not so far from Stockholm, 65 kilometers away, there on the shores of the Lake Mälaren. And sometimes people call Mariefred a city, yet it has less than 4,000 inhabitants. So in terms of size, in terms of number of inhabitants, it cannot be called a city. But why is it so? Well, it is because of the history of that place. And to understand that, we need to visit a place that is just a few hundred meters away from the center of the town. And that is a small island that is reachable through a bridge. You can go there walking. And there what you find is a castle. And it's one of the most famous castles of Sweden. Its name is Gripsholm Castle. It is famous because it belongs to the royal family of Sweden. But the royal family doesn't live there. In fact, nowadays the castle serves as a museum. There are guided tours there that you can do, and you can also see a big collection of portraits, of paintings, of people from the royal family and also people who have served in the government of Sweden in past centuries. So an interesting place to visit, but also an interesting place in order to understand the Reformation as well, the times of the Reformation there in Sweden. But first we need to draw a small historical sketch of that place, which will help us understand what happened there in the 16th century. And we need to go back to the 14th century. A man named Bo Jonsson Grip bought the island at the time and built a castle. Now he came from a noble family, the Grip family. At the time was quite a rich and important family there in Sweden. Grip, by the way, simply means griffin. That's a legendary animal with the body of an eagle, the head of a lion. Well, that was the name of that family. And Bo Jonsson Grip so bought the island, built a castle there, and it belonged to him. But then, a few decades later, the site was handed over to the Crown of Sweden. And it will not stay long in the hands of the Crown of Sweden because during the famous Engelbrekt rebellion between 1434 and 1436, the castle was set on fire. It was destroyed. And for a few decades, the island remained unoccupied until Sten Sture the Elder bought the site again in 1472 and built there an estate again. Now, Sten Sture was a devout Catholic, and at the end of his life, he gave the island to a monastic order known as the Carthusian order, or the Chartreux in French. It comes from France. And so a monastery was set there, right in the estate that had been bought by Sten Sture the Elder. To remind you about Sten Sture, you can watch the first episode in which we talk about him. He led the rebellion against the King of Denmark, who was trying to seize the throne of Sweden at the time. So the island belonged therefore to the church, to a monastery now. It will remain like that until the year 1526. That's when Gustav Vasa was already king, and the monks were expropriated. They had to go away, and they were displaced to another monastery further west in the county, in Julita, which was a Cistercian monastery. So that's in a nutshell, the history. Now, the question, of course, is whatever happened? Why these monks were expelled? Well, according to the church law, which was the law ruling at the time before the Reformation, whatever estate was given to the church could be reclaimed by a direct heir. Now, Sten Sture the elder, the direct heir that could claim the estate was none other than the father of Gustav Vasa. In fact, Gustav Vasa's father was none other than the nephew of Sten Sture the elder. And his father in fact, could have reclaimed the land, but he didn't. He didn't reclaim the land. So therefore, the monastery was the possession of the church, or the island was the possession of the church. But Gustav Vasa came up saying that his father could not, actually did not decide freely, but he was forced. And so he argued that the island should go back to him, that the decision of his father should be cancelled because he did not act freely. Well, the monks disagreed, obviously, and it was really the word of the king against the word of the monks. And at the end, finally, a council of the kingdom decided to hand over the monastery to the king and to expel the monks. Well, this event really sets a precedent for two reasons. First of all, that was the beginning of what will later become the abolition of monasticism in Sweden, and all the monasteries will be emptied. But that was the first time something like that happened there in Sweden. And secondly, it was a clear case, and one of the first cases in which, in fact, the state or civil authorities were overruling the law of the church and were overruling the church over a church property. And that also was something new. Well, really, all of that was not quite correct, even according to the principles of the Reformation. But really what happened there was a collision between two views. The first view is known as papalism. That was the view that dominated Western Europe, that is, until the Reformation, and that is that the Pope has supreme authority even over civil authorities. Civil authorities could not rule the way they wanted. They had to be submitted to the Pope. Now, why was it so? Well, this view really of sovereignty was because the Pope was seen as the vicar of Christ, as God's representative on earth. And there's an excerpt of a letter of a Pope in the 12th century and that lived until 1216, Innocent III, which really tells a lot about that view known as papalism, and I'm going to quote right now. To me is said in the person of the prophet, I have set thee over nations and over kingdoms, to root up and to pull down, to waste and to destroy, and to build and to plant. To me also is said in the person of the apostle, I will give to thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind upon earth, it shall be bound in heaven, etc. Thus, the others were called to a part of the care, but Peter alone assumed the plenitude of power. You see then who is the servant set over the household, truly the vicar of Jesus Christ, successor of Peter, anointed of the Lord, a God of Pharaoh, set between God and man, lower than God but higher than man, who judges all and is judged by no one. End of quote. That was a letter of the Pope, Pope Innocent III, to an archbishop there in Italy at the time. And it's quite an outstanding claim, really. The Pope takes for himself the rule that belongs to Jesus Christ and believes to be the representative here on Jesus Christ, higher than everyone else. That was the view known as papalism. Now, obviously, Gustav Vasa did not agree with that view. He was right not to agree with that view. It's even using biblical verses not in the right context. He was taking for himself authority that really belongs to Christ and to Christ alone. But so Gustav Vasa disagreed with that. But nonetheless, what he did was not right either. Now, his view later on will be known as Erastianism. That is the fact that civil authorities could rule over the church and punish all the sins of the church. Now, obviously, that view, Erastianism, the name came later because the father of that view, Thomas Erastus, was only a baby when Gustav Vasa was born. but it was really in line of the views of what Thomas Erastus would develop later. Now, why was it wrong for Gustav Vasa? Well, both sides believed that they were ultimately obeying God's commandments. I've said already, the papalist view was wrong to believe that the Pope is in fact set over everyone else. That's the Roman Catholic view of authority, of sovereignty. But for the King of Sweden had no right to take that estate from the Roman Catholic Church, according to biblical principles. Why is that? Well, we have, in fact, an event in the Bible. And if you read that in 1 Kings, the first book of Kings, in chapter 21, you see there how a king of Israel named Ahab had seized the land of a poor man named Naboth. He had seized his vineyard. He had killed Naboth in order to get the land of that poor man, which was just there near his estates. And that was condemned by God. In fact, God did not condemn just because the king just because he had killed a poor man and that a rich man had taken over the lands of a poor man, just because he took the lands of someone else. That was wrong. If the poorer man had taken the lands of the rich man, that would have been the same judgment. The Bible is strongly protective for private property. This is something that is fundamental in the biblical view of private property. And so, really, the king had no right to take the lands there from the monks, even though we know, and I refer to you to other stages, previous stages that I had, how monasticism was wrong. You can go to see the stage of Vadstena, for example. Monasticism had gone very corrupt. Nonetheless, the king had no right to take the monastery from the monks on the claims that he had brought. And in fact, we can read that from the Bible, Deuteronomy 19:14, which says, "You shall not move your neighbor's landmark, which the men of old have set, in the inheritance that you will hold in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess." So in other words, the Bible strongly defends the right to private property, as I said. So the decision was wrong. Gustav Vasa violated the biblical rights to private property for the monks of Gripsholm. But now, what could be said about our current situation here in the West, in countries even like Sweden? Sadly, this biblical principle of private property is frequently violated, not so much by seizing lands, but through taxes, property taxes, and even inheritance taxes, which sometimes forces people to sell the estate they have inherited just because they don't have enough money to pay the tax. And that's, in fact, not in line with the biblical worldview. So this shows that a reformation today is highly needed in the countries that were shaped by the Reformation, but pretty much everywhere in Europe and across the West. Well, I'm Cedric Placentino. See you next time for another stage of European Journeys.